I guess that plot twist, I called it. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. I hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing my best and worst books of 2021. Okay, before you get into anything bookish, however, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments what is one best book and one worst book. Let's see if I add some stuff to my TBR. Also, I might be able to knock something off. So guess who actually made a decision about what her favorite book of the year was? Me. And that's very shocking because normally I'm way too indecisive about that, but I did it. I took the time to take these seven books. These 7 books that I really loved this year and went through, ordered all of them, and I came to a #1 favorite. It was really hard, okay? I have some great contenders, but also we have my worst books of the year. Thankfully, I only really have 3 of those. So in the end, we're gonna do some really fast reviews of my 10 books, 7 best, 3 worst. Let's just go ahead and get the worst books out of the way because we want positivity here. Obviously, I feel like it goes without saying that just because these are my worst books of the year do not necessarily make these bad books. Honestly, I would say pretty across the board, I read fairly well-written books all year. However, these 3 in particular just did not work for me, unfortunately. So let's jump into the 3rd from the worst book of the year. That is going to be 𝗖cie and 𝗁 by Leigh Bardugo. This is the 2nd book in the Shadow and Bone series, and I think this was my 3rd of Leigh Bardugo's books. I read this as a part of the Grishaverse read-along, and being honest here, I probably should have given up halfway through this book. I really wish I had DNF'd it. Oh my god. I feel like I don't even really have to give a summary of Shadow and Bone, but basically it is a magical-based universe in which our main character, Alina, has suddenly found out that she has these magical powers and is being taken to be trained with them in order to cross this dark fold that encircles her country. 2nd one specifically, everyone loves because of the introduction of a specific character. He was my favorite part of the book, but unfortunately, he could not save it for me. I think I gave this one about 2.5 stars because I really could not stand majority of the story. The romance element of this book feels so immature and so underwritten. It is just constant miscommunication back and forth between Alina and her best friend / possible love interest Mal. I swear, it was 200 pages of them fighting, trying to talk but not really doing it, and then being mad at each other. I was so exhausted trying to push through this book that by the time I hit the official climax at the end, I skimmed through majority of it because I just could not stand these characters anymore. A big complaint I've actually heard about the Shadow and Bone series, which I definitely agree with, is that it suffers being only in Alina's perspective. An omnipresent narrator, that would have been amazing in comparison, because the aspects of this story that I really enjoyed were the magic and the world building. Did not care about the plot, did not care about the characters. So yes, unfortunately, this was my 3rd from the worst book of the year. Following that one, next worst, was 𝗖cie by Natalie C. Parker. This one I probably would say is the closest to being a poorly written book for the year. Overall, I just think the author didn't have enough direction for her story, and many of the elements throughout it felt underdeveloped. The plot feels very thin, and the basis of following this all-female crew who are trying to beat all of these men pirates that roam the seas was interesting, but there's not really much driving the story forward. Not to mention, there's 50 women on this ship, and literally just the main character has personality. That is it. There's also a love interest, and the romantic element, not great. If you've heard me review this before, you know my biggest complaint with this is I just had a very hard time getting my footing in the world. I couldn't understand what the author was going for. Was it nautical? Was it steampunk? Was it old-timey? Was it futuristic? It had these odd combinations of things, but it just seemed like a weird amalgamation that she was creating as the story went on, but didn't have a set idea in mind when she started writing it. I'm pretty sure I gave this one 2 stars when I read it as a part of my Pirates 5x5. I'll put a link to that video over here if you're interested for a more in-depth review, but this one was not great. Finally, my worst book of the year, which I will admit right now, this is 100% because I hated the idea from the beginning, and I should have known better and just decided to DNF it right out of the gate. That was One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. This is a recreation of basically The Bachelor, told in which the main character is this plus-size blogger. I could not stand it. I hate The Bachelor. I hate all kinds of love-related reality TV shows. When this was picked for the book club I do with my two best friends, I said I would try to read it, and I did in fact actually finish it. But my god, it was a painful process the entire way through. The whole time that our main character B is on the TV show, I just had no faith in any of the relationships she was developing, because I don't see this TV show as a realistic basis for a serious relationship. The one character I actually did like, he kind of got vilified at one point, and honestly, I disagree with how it was written. I would have been on his side as well. The story is told in a multimedia aspect, which I think is really interesting to do for a romance. It has scripts from the TV show, it has receipts from things B buys, it has tweets, it has text messages, all this kind of stuff. I loved the representation. One of the big things B complained about at the beginning of the book was the lack of representation on the TV show, apart from all straight, white, pretty people, and so I liked seeing that. There was a contestant who had a non-gender conforming child, and obviously B herself was plus sized. That's fantastic. However, I hated the way B's plus sizeness was written. That sounds very odd. I just had a hard time with her character because it was as though she put on this front that she loved herself and she was comfortable in her body, but she was also so self-conscious constantly, and progress to reach acceptance was so slow moving. Not for me. I know plenty of people who enjoy The Bachelor and read this book, loved it. I'm so happy for you for that, because that's exactly what this book is going for. I knew I wasn't gonna like it. I am not surprised I didn't like it. I think technically I gave it 2 stars, but in reality, looking back on it, it's probably more like a 1.5. I gave it the 0.5 for the unusual storytelling aspect in a romance and the good representation. Okay, now that we have the negative books out of the way, let's go into my positives. So I'm gonna go from the 7th all the way down to the 1st, which is the best book of the year. Starting out is Conventionally Yours by Annabeth Albert. I've been squealing about this all year since I read it back in February. This is a enemies to lovers story between these two rivals who end up having to go on a road trip together, as they are a part of this team that plays 𝗖cie, which is a card game kind of reminiscent to Magic the Gathering, and they end up falling in love along the way. It is so cute. It is so wholesome. There's some fantastic representation in this. There's serious discussions as well. I just had such a great time falling in love with these two characters. Oh my gosh. This story manages to be so sweet and wholesome while also tackling some serious topics between both of our main characters. Alden is neurodivergent, but he is not sure of an official label and is very uncomfortable with that, while Conrad is struggling with being homeless while in college due to getting kicked out because of his sexuality. My urge to reread this has been really strong lately, ever since I got a physical copy, and it was so dang precious. I think I gave it 4.5 stars when I officially rated it. The road trip sequence can get a little repetitive. Personally, I usually love a road trip sequence, but it was so dang good. I loved it. I really recommend this. Next is Gods of Jade Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and I believe I read this as a part of my historical fiction 5x5. This story is following our main character Cassiopeia, who becomes linked with a Mayan death god after a sliver of bone embeds in her finger, and they have to work together to try and beat his brother who usurped his throne from him. It reads very much like a fairy tale, and it is based in Mayan folklore and mythology, which I found fascinating. It's also set in the 1920s in Mexico. Moreno Garcia does an amazing job at atmosphere. She really brings the setting to life. Not to mention, I think she does a fantastic job of creating morally gray characters to watch and root for as the story progresses. I really enjoyed this one. I definitely want to try and make my niece read it, since it does kind of read like a fairy tale. I may have to skip a little bit of the exposition for her, but I think she could probably enjoy this just as much as I did. Next one is The Bone Houses by Emily Lloyd Jones. I read this in October as a part of my Raid My Shelves, I believe. I did not expect to fall in love with this one as much as I did. This bounces back and forth between two individuals. One is Ren, who is a gravedigger who also takes care of bone houses, which are improperly buried bodies that are usually found in the forest nearing her town. Also, we are following Ellis, who is this map maker that was found in said woods. Ellis ends up hiring Ren to take him into the forest so that he can map the mountains and become super rich. This story was beautiful. I think Emily Lloyd-Jones did an amazing job of showcasing that you can have a well-developed world with interesting and complex characters that have a beautiful relationship develop in one book alone. I loved this one. As you can tell, there are a million tabs in it. So perfect for October time. It's very atmospheric. The creepy fairy tale feel is just like my absolutely favorite thing in fantasy books, I'm now realizing, because I have another one that we'll get to eventually that also has that same tone, and it's my favorite. I love it. I need more fantasy books like that. I also gave this one 4.5 stars. I do think at the very end there's a specific scene that just was a little unnecessary. It was a bit repetitive by that point, and I think we could have just skipped over it and jumped right into the next setting. I'm trying not to spoil anything, but okay, so this one's kind of cheating, and there will be another one later down that is also kind of cheating, but the Green Creek series by TJ Klune. I am holding Wolfsong, but I specifically actually want to say Ravensong, which is the second book. This series starts off by following Ox, who lives in this small town, and one day he meets the Bennett family and they end up changing his life forever. The found family in this, guys. It's amazing. While I read majority of the first book in one day because I literally could not put it down, the second book is probably my favorite. That one, Ravensong, is following Gordo and Mark, who are probably my favorite couple across the board. They have a second chance / enemies to lovers romance, and it's so good. I loved it so much. Gordo is my favorite kind of character, I've come to realize, which is a self-destructive hero type who is super grumpy constantly but cares so deeply about everyone around him. Those assholes are my weaknesses, and that describes Gordo to a T. Yes, technically speaking, I am putting the Green Creek series in this slot, even though it's specifically Ravensong, but the entire series was amazing. I fell in love with it and I read it so quickly. Some of these books are really big, so that's kind of impressive for me, but I think TJ Klune really is just becoming a favorite author because the man can create such fantastic found families, give you such a warm, happy feeling, and at the same time, in the same book, managed to rip your heart out. It's a talent, honestly. I gave both Wolfsong and Ravensong 5 stars. Okay, this next one was what I was talking about when I said another creepy fairy tale tone, and that's To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is a Little Mermaid retelling in which our two main characters are a siren who is known for killing princes and a prince who is known for killing sirens. I read this as a part of my 5x5 Pirates edition as well, and this is probably my favorite. No, what am I saying? This was my favorite of the entire video. It was so creepy, so weird, and yet both of these characters were so interesting. They have so many beautiful parallels between the two of them, and I think that made the relationship between them that we watched develop so much more fun. Also, there's so much tension and angst, which pairs perfectly with the creepy, whimsical tone that has apparently taken over my life. I will say this is definitely not for everybody. It's pretty slow-paced, it's very character-focused, there's a ton of exposition. I was fascinated the entire way through, and I can guarantee this is going to get reread at some point because as a Little Mermaid retelling, I loved everything about it. It was the dark and scary retelling I wanted from a fairy tale. I gave this one 5 stars. Alright, so this next one is also kind of cheating because it's also a series, and I feel like if anyone has spent any time on my channel at all, they will not be surprised. The Sands of Aralia. I read both of them this year, and technically speaking, I gave this one 4.5 and this one 5 stars, but I'm just gonna plot them in here because I read them both this year, and it's a duology, and we already kind of had one series, so why not break the rules again? Wait, what am I talking about? This is my channel. I can do what I want. Sands of Aralia series. Also, I've come to realize not for everybody, but I loved it. Super slow-moving, beautiful enemies to lovers relationship between these two people who are living in this magical world where they have to go into the Ars, which is this creepy demon-infested forest, to try and find some kind of an artifact that will help to save their countries. The writing in this is absolutely exquisite. It is so eloquent, it is so beautiful, it is almost poetic in how the story unfolds, and I loved the characters so very much. Zafira is probably my new favorite female character ever, not to mention this has a fantastic enemies to best friends arc also between two characters. It's so cool, and Like I said, I've come to learn not everybody loves these nearly as much as I do, but I love them dearly, okay? I'm never gonna stop talking about them. Favorite fantasy series ever. Finally, we have reached my favorite book of the year. I am also getting super hot in here. I feel like no one should be particularly surprised about this. Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. As I mentioned, TJ Klune just officially up there as one of my new favorite authors because the man has a way of somehow making his writing feel like a happy, warm hug and then rip out my heart. The story follows Wallace, who has recently passed away and is taken to a tea house called Karen's Crossing in order to try and cope with his death and eventually pass on. But he ends up finding a little family there, and have I mentioned that I love TJ Klune's found families? Because I do. This story kind of has a middle ground feeling between House in the Cerulean Sea and the Green Creek series. For me, it manages to kind of ride that line of the middle grade for adults that Cerulean Sea has, while at the same time looking at some much heavier and darker topics like Green Creek. Combining the both of them together into this absolutely wonderful story was just fantastic. It looks at grief. It looks at grief in so many different ways. So it is definitely a heavy book, but I kind of read it in like the best / worst possible time I could, depending on how you look at it. The characters in this are adorably quirky, which I adore, and also the slow burn romance was just so cute. I loved it. I need to take the time to actually go through and annotate all of my favorite lines in this one like I did with Cerulean Sea, but this was amazing, and honestly, I'm not even a little surprised that it was my top book of the year because right after I finished it, I just spent like a solid 15 minutes crying and wanting to like hug a pillow to my chest, but also had the warmest feeling in my heart. I feel like I don't have to tell you that I gave this 5 stars after that review, but I gave it 5 stars. Alright guys, so that was all of my worst and best books for the year. Again, thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have my Goodreads, Storygraph, Tumblr, and Instagram linked in the description if you're interested in keeping up with what I am reading. I come out with videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!